When you identify with a character in a movie, you think you are connecting with them. But what if you are actually just looking at yourself? Identification is not about the other, it's about you. Identification is not the same as empathy. Let me explain what I mean and why it matters. Let's define identification as a mental and emotional process by which you find yourself in the other person, in someone else. It's a process where you see the other one as an equal, as the same as you. So you erase differences. Let's think of identification as a process in which you use the other as a mirror. Identification comes from identity or identify. It's a family of words. And when you talk about identifying something, what are you talking about? You are talking about recognizing something, not discovering, but saying, oh, okay, I recognize this is a cup of coffee. I'm drinking coffee again. I know what it is. I already know. You arrive here, you see this, and you say, oh, it's a cup of coffee. I'm gonna drink it because I know what it is. It's not coffee. You may find out, but now it's coffee. So I knew what it was. I already had a name for it. And that's what Russian writer talked about in 1917 in his famous text, Art as Technique. Victor Shklovsky talked about how we in daily life have an automatic way of perceiving things. Our perception, our daily perception, our daily life perception is almost completely automatized. So we don't see things but recognize things. So when we get here, we don't say, oh, what is this? Let's discover this. We say, I know what it is. I have a name. The name is cup of coffee. So it's a shortcut. It's a perceptive shortcut by which we save time, basically. It's a survival tool. Identification is a survival tool. It's a process by which we map the world so we understand it and feel safe. In the end, it's all about safety. It's a narcissistic approach to otherness, to the world, to difference, because you see yourself or your categories, your names for things, in other places, and especially in other people. You meet someone, I meet someone, and I talk a few minutes, and I already labeled that person. I say, oh, I got you. You get angry easily, as I do. Just as I do. Just as I do. So you think you understand the other by labeling with your preconceived categories, names. So you don't really get to see the otherness of the other. You place the other in the maps of the world you already had. That's what our brains do, and that's a survival mechanism. That's very important. We wouldn't survive. We wouldn't make it if our brains didn't do that. But it's a limited mechanism. As a map, identification is allowing and helpful process by which we survive, basically, but it's also a limited process. So when we get to that limit and we acknowledge, oh, okay, this is limiting my capacity to grow, to expand, to connect with others more deeply, there comes what I call empathy. I know empathy is a very, I would say, overused word, but let me explain what I mean when I use the word empathy. Of course, both words are just words. So maps, concepts, generalizations, and different people can use those very same words in different ways. So that's a note to make it clear that I'm using identification and empathy in this particular way. You can use it the way you want to use it. So empathy, what is empathy? Empathy for me is listening, opening up to otherness. It's also a mental and emotional process by which you open up to otherness, to the difference in the other. It's a process by which you stop the mechanism of identifying what you already know for safety, for the sake of safety. You suspend that process. Empathy asks for you that you suspend the process of identification, so you can open up. If identification is closing perception into your definitions of what is real, your maps. If identification is closing, empathy, or let's say listening, is opening. So we close to be safe, we open to expand, to grow, to get free. Shklovsky, he made this difference that we can also question whether the difference is so clear or not, but he proposed a difference between what he called daily language and poetic language. So daily language has to do with identification, putting names and labels on things, mapping reality. And poetic language has to do with this adjusting perception, the automatizing perception, as he talked about. In Russian, it was the word ostranenie, which means stranging or unfamiliarizing your perception. So you come to the cup and you say, what is this? So he talked, for example, about Tolstoy as an example of a writer who used a lot this process of stranging, I don't know how it is in English, ostranenie, making your perception strange, unfamiliar, making the object unfamiliar. So you don't recognize the cup as a cup anymore, and you open to the possibility of not knowing, at least for a second, not knowing what this is about. What is this? What is this? So Shklovsky said that by these poetic mechanisms or devices, you get to see things and not only recognize things. One of the ways in which Tolstoy achieved this strange perception of familiar things was telling a story through the eyes, for example, of a horse. So there's a story in which Tolstoy talks about borders between countries, I think, or something like that, but through the eyes of a horse. Through the eyes of the horse, Tolstoy made you feel or touch the absurdity of artificial borders, let's say, political borders. So in my previous example, I come to meet these people, this person, this other, and I sense that his or they are getting angry. And instead of me saying, I got you, you're one of these people that get angry easily, just like me. Or maybe I do label the person, but I don't conform to that label. I don't believe anymore that my label is actually the real thing. It's not about not labeling or not judging the other, because that's what our minds, our brains do. So sometimes we idealize this no reactive way of behaving or relating to others, but our brain is wired and programmed to do that, to judge and label the other. The question is, would you keep that as the truth? Or will you risk yourself your ego to the possibility that your story is not Let me read you a passage from Kenneth Bernard, The Man in the Stretcher, collected short fiction. He's an amazing writer. I totally recommend his short stories. There's a story I read yesterday in the park. It's called Antecedents. And let me read you this little paragraph. The other day, a colleague was discoursing on the complex beauty of trees. The other day, a colleague was discoursing on the complex beauty of trees. I knew what he was getting at. Yes, I replied. But how much more complex they would be if they were not called trees? How much more complex the trees would be if they were not called trees. The cup, the trees. He looked at me oddly, and finally said, "But what would they be if not trees?" "Something else," I replied. "Everything would be something else." Everything would be something else, and it goes on. It's a very strange piece of narrative, recommended. But what is he talking about here, at least my reading? Names. We use names and concepts to label reality so we feel safe, but reality is not just our names for it. Reality doesn't accommodate our stories of reality. So it's very interesting when we see films and we can realize or sense or perceive or read when they are working with identification and when they are leaving room for otherness. In general, commercial mainstream movies tend to work towards identification. So the viewer understands every sign as part of a fabric that makes sense, a map that makes sense easily. Kids ask their parents to read them stories or tell them stories at night to sleep. Stories give us relief. That's the first and probably the most important function of storytelling, of narrative, of stories. To give us relief, to let us know that we belong or fit in, or we belong to the tribe. Stories are a way for us to tell our kids how to behave. They are important because they bring us together. Stories bring us together, but they also limit our possibilities for growth, expansion. Culture, Terence McKenna would say, culture is a plot against the expansion of consciousness. A lot of movies, and especially mainstream movies, work in this direction towards the easy reading and the easy the shortcut to meaning. It's all served in like in a silver platter. Is that an expression? Like spoon feed. The movies, mainstream movies or more commercial movies tend to spoon feed you all the answers, so you don't have to make any effort in the reading. A good example of a movie that works fundamentally based on and towards identification, for the viewer to read every sign of the narrative as part of a coherent rendering of meaning is Brooklyn, a movie that is all built up, or almost all of it constructed for you to understand every gesture of the actor, every word, every piece of dialogue, every moment of the music. In quite it's a very archetypal narrative. It's about this young Irish girl, an adolescent, that finds a job in New York. So she travels, I think in 1951 or so. And it's all about immigrants and roots. And it's a movie that makes it very easy for you to understand what they are talking about. And then you have movies like Sundown, directed by Michel Franco, a Mexican director, with Tim Roth. And it's a very interesting example of how a movie can invite the viewer to have an experience, a very experimental experience of what approaching otherness means. While in Brooklyn you almost all the time understand exactly what she's thinking and feeling, in Sundown you almost never get to really completely understand what Tim Roth's character is experiencing, because the movie plays a lot with the subministration, is that a word? With the adding of information very slowly. It's as if every scene gives you a piece of information, of new information, that demands for you as a viewer to adjust your judgment on the character. For me, it was a very interesting experience. It's manipulation at its best because it offers an experiment on how we approach otherness. And probably that's what fiction is all about this dialogue between identification and empathy, between closing and labeling and judging and opening to the mystery and difference of the other. As Gilberto Pérez, the Cuban critic on film, put in his book, he said something like, in fiction, the most important thing is not so much the character, but the way in which you approach the character, in which the movie asks you to approach the character. So it's not so much about the other, but about the way we approach the other, how we read the other, how we acknowledge that we are labeling, judging, fixating on our ideas of the other, identification, or opening up to the otherness of the other. So that's what fiction is all about, in a way, in a word, I would say, about not so much about the other, but about how we approach otherness. So I leave you with this question. How do you approach characters when watching a movie or reading a novel? Do you easily get caught in this judging and labeling process, this identification process? When it's not so easy for you to identify with a character in a fictional experience, do you get angry? Do you get mad? Do you get pissed? Is it frustrating for you when it's not so easy to identify with a character? How do you relate with that situation in your daily life? How do you approach the other? That's a very interesting question. I think that's what we human beings are dealing with. Narrative problems are political problems because the way in which we tell our stories have a lot to do with the way we relate to each other, and that's what politics is all about, the way in which we relate with one another. So let me know in the comments, how do you relate with this identification problem, and how do you approach characters and others, both in fiction and in your life. Cheers. See you in the next one.